Among the female rulers of Europe, there is one who, on account of her matchless beauty, her genius, her adventurous life, but especially her tragic death, has enlisted the attention and admiration of authors and poets even to a higher degree than Catherine II of Russia or Elizabeth of England, who perhaps surpassed her in political genius. More regretted and admired for her misfortunes and accomplishments than condemned for her sins and crimes, Mary Stuart, the beautiful Queen of Scots, lives in the recollections of posterity as a vision of incomparable grace, beauty and loveliness, hallowed by the genius of great poets and redeemed by a tragic and cruel death. Mary Stuart was the only daughter of King James V of Scotland by his second wife, Marie de Lorraine. James V died young, with his daughter yet in her cradle. Quite young, she was betrothed to the Dauphin of France, who became afterwards King Francis II, and she was married to him when a mere child. Her renown for beauty and genius resounded from one end of Europe to the other. With remarkable facility, she learned French, Italian, Greek, Latin, history, theology, music, painting, dancing, and she excelled in writing poetry. Some of her short poems are still famous in French literature. But her life as Queen of France was but a short dream of splendor and delight. The weak and emaciated Francis II died after a reign of 11 months, and the crown went to his young brother, Charles IX. Mary Stuart retired for a while to a convent at Rheims, but soon, upon the death of her mother at Edinburgh, she proceeded to Scotland, where a throne awaited her. Quite a number of enthusiastic adorers among the high nobility of France followed her to her new home because they could not bear the thought of separating from a princess so charming and beautiful, a princess who kindled in the hearts of all men who were brought into contact with her desires and frequently a passion which became fatal to them. Unquestionably, Mary Stuart was one of the most dangerous coquettes who ever lived. And at the brilliant and voluptuous court of the Valois in France, almost under the personal direction of the famous Diana de Poitiers, she had cultivated the art of using her extraordinary charms and accomplishments for the seduction of men to her best advantage. One attendant who had followed Queen Mary from France to Scotland, and whose tragic fate is our topic here, was David Rizzio, an Italian musician, who for some time had been attached to the court of Francis II of France. Rizzio was of low birth, but had some talent as a composer of songs and as a singer, and had been brought from Italy by the French ambassador at Piedmont. By a congeniality of taste, the poor and low-born Italian artist and the beautiful young queen were thrown together a great deal, and gradually the love for the art ripened into a preference for the artist. He soon became the declared favorite and private secretary of the queen, who made him practically the omnipotent counselor and minister of her policy. The scandal of this singular preference, which was at once announced as a vulgar love affair, spread rapidly over all Scotland and gave rise to loud complaints by the Protestants, headed by John Knox, who preached against the woman of Babylon and her low-bred paramour. The queen was blind to the consequences of her infatuation for this lute player, a mere servant who, moreover, by his Italian nationality and Catholic religion, defied the narrow prejudices of the Scotch people. In spite of her beauty, youth and loveliness, the queen became very unpopular, not only with the nobility, but with the great mass of the people. At that very time, Mary Stuart was induced, mainly through the influence of Queen Elizabeth of England, to contract a marriage with Henry Darnley, a young Scot of the almost royal house of Lennox, of great physical beauty but a very inferior mind. On seeing this young Adonis, Mary Stuart fell immediately and very desperately in love with him, while it was noticed that Darnley showed much greater coldness than men generally manifested in their gallantry toward her. Darnley, descending from a daughter of Henry VIII, had perhaps as good a title to the crown of England as Mary Stuart, and by a marriage of these two claimants, it was expected that their interests would be consolidated and consequently strengthened. The interest which Queen Elizabeth of England had to promote this marriage was her hope of lowering Queen Mary's standing and authority in the eyes of her many Catholic adherents in England by this marriage with an English subject, an intention in which Elizabeth was largely successful. In spite of the strong opposition of a number of the most prominent Scotch nobles, and most notably of Lord Murray, Mary's half-brother, the marriage was consummated on the 29th of July, 1565. On the other hand, David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary and confidant, had very warmly advocated and promoted the marriage, and Darnley openly paid court to him, expecting great results from his influence over the Queen. Why Rizzio should have so eagerly encouraged the marriage is involved in doubt. Very likely the scandalous stories circulated about the Queen's relations to Rizzio were mere inventions, and Rizzio, far from being the Queen's lover, was only ambitious. He hoped to have even a greater share of political authority under a nominal king whom he recognized as an intellectual non-entity, but whose personal beauty diverted the young Queen's thoughts from the cares of government. During the first months after the wedding, Rizzio's expectations were fully realized. The young Queen, in the transport of her passion for Darnley, paid no attention to government affairs. Her whole mind and soul seemed to be enwrapped in her love for her young husband. Apparently she cared for nothing else but to caress him and to shower her favors upon him. She conferred upon him the title of king, without, however, giving him the attributes of royal power, which she reserved for herself. After the first few weeks had passed away in the closest intimacy with her consort, Mary's extreme fondness, not to say idolatry, of him entirely disappeared, and in a very short time her conduct toward him assumed a degree of estrangement and coldness, which contrasted strangely with the cordiality which had preceded them. Mary's full confidence and intimacy turned once more toward Rizzio, whose ascendancy over her mind seemed to be greater than ever before. More than anybody else, Darnley was dissatisfied with this turn of affairs. He saw that the chance of empire had slipped away from him, and he found that it was impossible for him to recover his former standing with the Queen. In vain he tried to be admitted to a direction of the government affairs and to perform some of the duties which seemed to pertain to his exalted station in the state, but Queen Mary obstinately refused to accede to these demands. Darnley, who ascribed this refusal in part at least to Rizzio's influence, then joined the party of political malcontents who, either from motives of personal ambition or of religious antipathy, were anxious to bring about the overthrow of the Italian favorite and place a national and, if possible, a Protestant ministry in power. To carry out this plan, they won Darnley over to their side and filled his mind with dark insinuations and jealousy against Rizzio. It seems they also promised him a co-regency with the Queen and full royal authority equal to hers in case the much-hated Italian should be removed. These prospects were sufficient to inflame Darnley's ambition and make him a willing tool in the hands of Rizzio's enemies. He did not shrink even from murder and committed it openly and defiantly. As soon as the conviction had been established in his mind that Rizzio stood in the way of his ambition, he resolved upon his assassination, which was not only to lead to his own aggrandizement, but also to punish Mary for having preferred the Italian to him. He did not wait long to carry his plan into execution, and the brutality and reckless ferocity with which the murder was committed were even more atrocious and repulsive than the crime itself. Only a brute and cowardly knave could have planned it. The murder was committed on the evening of Sunday, the 9th of March, 1566, in the Queen's private dining room in the Palace of Holyrood, adjoining her bedroom. The Queen was there with the Countess of Argyll, one or two other ladies, and Rizzio, her secretary. The best of feeling and humour prevailed in the little party. There was not the least indication or suspicion of impending trouble or danger. Nevertheless, an armed force of 500 adherents of the conspirators, under the lead of one of Darnley's lieutenants, had been posted on the outside so as to surround the palace entirely. The greatest caution had been observed to avoid all noise, and the first intimation that something was wrong was conveyed to the little party in the dining room by the sudden appearance of Darnley. With great familiarity, he throws his arm around the Queen's waist. He is almost immediately followed by Ruthven, one of his friends, who is clad in full armour and is ghastly pale from excitement and fear. The Queen haughtily commands him to leave the room, but before he can answer, her bedroom is filled with men bearing torches and brandishing their swords, nearly all under the influence of liquor, and calling with loud and threatening voices for Rizzio. The Italian knows immediately what this scene means. He jumps from his seat and takes refuge behind the Queen, clutching her gown with the grasp of despair and imploring her to save his life. Mary Stuart at this moment stands erect in the consciousness of her outraged dignity, her eyes sparkling with indignation and wrath, and trying to protect Rizzio against the crowd of aggressors who are pushing up to her, upsetting the table on which she leans her hand and trying to push her aside in order to get at Rizzio. For a few moments she succeeds in keeping them at bay, but then it is Darnley who comes to their rescue. He seizes the Queen, tries to push her away, and takes hold of Rizzio's hand in order to make him loose his grasp of Mary's gown. In this struggle, Mary has partly uncovered the Italian, and one of the conspirators, espying the opportunity, plunges a dagger over Mary's shoulder into Rizzio's breast. It is a signal for a general assault on the unfortunate victim. Like madmen, they rush upon him from all sides. They drag him from behind the queen, who is herself in danger of being slain. They beat him, they kick him. They plunge their swords, their knives, their daggers into his bleeding and mutilated body. They pull him by the hair, lifeless and maimed as he is, through the dining room, through the bedroom, to the outer door of the antechamber, and only desist when they see that it is nothing but a corpse which they are maltreating. The assassination of Rizzio had opened a chasm between Mary Stuart and Darnley, which nothing but his own blood could fill up. Nor would she permit the blood of Rizzio to be washed off the floor. She wished that it should forever remain as a mark of the murder which had been committed there, and she ordered a partition to be built between the grand staircase and the door of the antechamber leading to her bedroom, in order to protect the blood-stained floor from being desecrated by the feet of visitors. In this condition, the palace has remained for centuries, and the stains caused by Rizzio's blood have withstood the lapse of hundreds of years. The halcyon days which Mary had tried to create for herself at Holyrood, the days and hours which she had hoped would console her by poetry, music and song for her absence from France, had come to a sudden and cruel end.